The Kohler Branham urinal, a classic stall urinal that's been around for ages. Did you know there was a third generation? Well, you're looking at one right now. You see, the Kohler Branham has had a bit of an interesting history. Ever since its first generation, it's basically a standard China knockoff. Around the second generation is when they finally got their more unique design around in the mid 1960s. And they still sell the second generation, along with the third generation. Not much is known about the third generation, and I can't really blame them. Stall urinals in general are pretty rare, and I've rarely seen a Kohler Branham past the 2000s yet. But here's the newer one, the third generation design. The weird thing is that the second generation is still made to this day and is still listed on Kohler's site, along with the third generation. Early postings of this has been around since at least 2018, but it isn't listed on the second gen's specification sheet. However, in 2020 and 2023 versions of the spec sheets for the second generation, it recommends you to go up to this model right here, which is the third generation. And they haven't even discontinued the second gen unit, which is very weird. So, what's different with the third generation? Well, we can already kind of see it, but the accents up here. That's pretty much it. It looks virtually the same as every other Branham. The only difference is the accents. These accents have been featured on some Kohler urinals like the Barden and the Stanwell starting around the mid-2010s. But the Branham didn't get this until 2018, or estimated to be around 2018. And I definitely think it works better than the Barden and the Stanwell. It looks much nicer. But besides that, what else has changed? Not really much. Everything else is about the same as you might have expected. This one kind of sticks out for the floor. Most of these are buried into the floor. That's kind of how they were designed. But this one sticks out. But it's still got the same trapezoid shape for the lip. The designs on the side are almost the same, pretty much. I think they stick out a little bit more compared to the second gen, but it's virtually unnoticeable. But they are somewhat convenient compared to normal wash-down urinals. At least I think so. With this one, you definitely have a lot more space and privacy to do your business, considering it is a stall urinal, and that's one convenient thing about them. And they got a pretty good back wall, too, that feeds down into the drain. We'll watch this one flush. Definitely a pretty standard flush, not much to write home about there, but it does have fairly reasonable rinse, maybe except the back portion here. We'll sample that again. Usually around there when they kind of struggle, but most stall urinals are like that. And that is the mysterious third generation of Kohler Branham. I would not count on seeing these a lot unless you're in very special places that install stall urinals. But the redesign definitely brings out a little bit more life into them, and I definitely think it does it better compared to some other urinals like the Barden and Stanwell. Now, it's time to grade them. Since this will be the first time I'll be grading a urinal, I'll quickly explain what I'll be doing with urinals compared to toilets. Toilets have 10 categories to be graded on, but in this case, urinals will definitely be graded on less categories. In fact, only 5 categories will be graded when it comes to urinals. Reason being, considering that these don't do much compared to toilets. So therefore, it would be kind of pointless to use 10 categories for a urinal. That would be really ridiculous. So I think 5 would have been perfect enough. And towards the end, it will be graded out of 50, but they will be rounded up to 100 to keep with consistency of toilet grades. It would be kind of weird to grade them out of 50 and just leave it at that, so that's why I'm doing it. But let's get started. Starting off with the overall design of the urinal, it ain't much different from a second generation besides the accents, in which I think the accents help out for the better. I definitely think it's implemented much better compared to something like a newer Kohler Branham or a Stanwell, and because of that I'll score a 6. Spoiler alert, a lot of stall urinals will get this grade right here for the flush. If you've seen a stall urinal flush, you've basically seen all the stall urinals in the world. You could literally only seen one and you basically get the gist of how a stall urinal flushes. It's nothing very special, though I definitely think it functions a lot better to compare to a traditional wall-hung wash-down urinal. And because of that, it still scores a 5. But that's as high as I'll go. Here's another spoiler. A lot of stall urinals will definitely get higher scores in terms of rinsing, because they tend to have pretty good rinse overall. And this is no exception. The only kind of problem I could potentially see is the front little trapezoid part near the drain being a little bit more harder to reach to, considering it's a little bit more extended out compared to most traditional stall urinals. But besides that, the rinse is pretty great and it scores a 9. While stall urinals are definitely not as common anymore, they are definitely a lot more effective compared to the more traditional wall-hung wash-down urinal. Most of that can be attributed to a few things. One, considering that the stall urinal basically just kind of drains down instead of having to go through a whole trapway like a traditional wash-down urinal or even a P-trap washout urinal, which has some kind of holes or has a cover like, for example, the Kohler Deerfield. I personally think that these definitely function a lot more considering they don't have a lot to go through. It just goes straight down to a pipe, and that's all it really needs to do. It definitely makes it a lot more effective compared to a traditional washdown, that's on the wall or something like that, or even a P-trap. Therefore, I definitely think its effectiveness is higher considering that you don't have to go through a whole trapway just to finally get to the pipes and get drained out. I definitely think that's a lot more effective. Therefore, and spoiler alert, a lot of stall urinals will get this, gets an 8. Now let's talk about the overall value of this urinal. There's something that you need to know about most stall urinals. They're pretty much jack-of-all-trades kind of urinals. They are much different compared to your traditional washdown urinal that most people often buy nowadays. It's a lot different in that. There are some trade-offs that could be good or bad depending on what your preference is. For one thing, these urinals are pretty tall and go into the floor. This might benefit some considering that it kind of blends into everything, but others might not see it so well for certain things like potential cleaning, and if there's any water problems, it can kind of leak onto your floor, which can be kind of nasty for some. Another thing to note is that considering that it is a stall urinal, you have a lot more privacy compared to a lot of urinals, especially if your place does not offer dividers. But I definitely think the biggest trade-off is that, considering that this doesn't have a built-in trapway, it just simply drains in the floor and is a lot more of a simpler process, which might be good for some. However, its survivability might not be too great, especially if it comes to renovations. Considering these get mounted into the floor and into the wall, there's really no proper way to take it out unless you really try hard, but oftentimes you'll probably end up having to destroy the urinal, especially if you're doing a full renovation. Keep in mind there's definitely a lot more trade-offs when it comes to stall urinals, but these are some of the more common ones I would like to note. At the end of the day, stall urinals are really chosen by preference. If you are willing to deal with this, I definitely think it's a lot more beneficial compared to a traditional washdown urinal, but there's also some trade-offs that might turn some people away. Though, functionality-wise, is a lot better and it clogs a lot less compared to a traditional washdown urinal with a built-in trapway or a built-in strainer like a P-trap washout urinal. That's just something to keep in mind though. A stall urinal is not going to be for everyone, and that's perfectly fine. But if you're up for the test, I definitely do kind of recommend these, but the most I can give this is a 6. The final grade of the third generation Kohler Branham urinal is a 34 out of 50, which roughly translates to a 68 out of 100 once you base it off of grading it out of 100. This is a general spoiler for a lot of stall urinals. They're pretty jack of all trades. However, I definitely think they benefit a lot more compared to a traditional wall-hung wash-down urinal. That being that it has no trapway, and it also has less clogging problems. The only real trade-offs being is that it's in the floor, which can lead to some problems down the road, especially if your place has plumbing problems and backups, which will not be very pleasant. But as with most stall urinals, they're pretty jack of all trades, and it often really depends on the person. However, if you're me personally, I definitely prefer these a lot more compared to the traditional washdown urinal. Not only do a lot of modern washdown urinals suck, they're pretty ineffective and cause a lot of problems like flooding. Meanwhile, stall urinals don't really have that much of a problem. At the end of the day, It's up to you if you want to buy something like this, but I definitely think this version is definitely a little bit better because of the better designs compared to the second generation Kohler Branham. The version is definitely worth buying, and not because Kohler tells you to upgrade to that model. I definitely think it stands out a little bit more compared to the previous generation. But that's just me though.